So Scott, Janet, Amanda, thanks for taking a minute to sit down with me. I know that all three of you were involved in our pre-conference symposium on standards management. And I think our goal here today over the next 15 minutes or so in a crash course format is to give folks who couldn't be here a sense of what was covered in that session. And there's really sort of three topic areas. There's the overview of standards, what they are, how they're developed, who's involved in that process. And Amanda, I think you're going to cover that for us. There's how do regulatory bodies, especially the FDA, take advantage of standards, use those in the work that they do. And Janet, you're going to share a perspective on how industry uses standards in the work that they do. So before we dive into that, though, just give a quick intro, Scott. Tell folks who you are.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Scott Colburn. I am the director of our CDRH Standards and Conformity Assessment Program at FDA, and we have been involved in standards for just dozens and dozens of years, and have a wonderful portfolio of staff that are engaged with AAMI and a number of other SDO projects. And just thanks for having us here today.
Absolutely. And you've personally been involved with AAMI how long?
Oh,
have you been counting the years yet?
I think about almost 19 years now. Yeah.
Wow, almost to 20.
Almost to 20. Pretty sure.
Excellent. Janet, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Janet Prust. I'm with Represent 3M Healthcare as one of the AAMI industry members, and my current role is Global Standards Director. I've also been involved with the standards program here at AAMI for a number of years. I'm not going to tell you how many because
I'm never going to get it out of
you. But a little bit longer than Scott. And was very pleased to participate in the program on Monday. So thanks for having me as well.
Yeah, and it got rave reviews. People were really excited coming out of the session. I think we actually had to add a second room so that people could watch. And they couldn't get into the first room, or they added chairs. So that's pretty cool. So Amanda, that had to make you feel good, our VP of Standards.
It was great to see so many people interested in learning more about how to manage their standards participation, and for some people how to get involved.
Absolutely. All right, so you're going to give us the 101. What are these things called standards, and how do we get them?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think it's useful to understand AAMI's role in the standards world. AAMI's mission is the development, management, and use of safe and effective health technology. And one of the ways that we serve this mission is as a convener. And we are a convener of standards groups. So right from our inception, when we were founded in 1967, we have been a standards developing organization. We were accredited by ANSI in 1977 to develop American national standards under ANSI's auspices, which is under the essential requirements and involves due process and openness and balance and consideration of all views. So we have what I call a mature standards development program. We've been doing this for a long time, been doing it for 55 years, really. And
we haven't been involved that long.
No, not
disclaimer.
Either, but the program has really evolved over that time. So we started out writing AAMI standards and then American National Standards. And then our work program has progressed to the point where we now administer a number of U.S. technical advisory groups to international standards committees and subcommittees under ISO and IEC. And ANSI has also delegated us the responsibility to run the secretariat for a number of those groups as well. So it's different levels of participation depending on how you engage. So if you're a member of one of the national groups, you might be writing AAMI standards and technical information reports. If you're a U.S. Part of a group that functions as a U.S. technical advisory group, you can also be involved in the national adoption of ISO or IEC standards, and you're helping to develop the U.S. position towards these documents that are under development at the international level. And you also have the opportunity to go forward as a U.S. expert and serve directly on the international working group, so be part of the international drafting team for these documents.
So global in scale.
Yes.
Local in application, so we've got this
Very
ANSI
so.
component that comes together. So, so say a little bit about what the actual work that's done. So people may not understand what goes on in these working groups. I mean, these are folks actually developing the language that goes into these standards or technical advisory documents if they're that. So say a bit about that.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a misconception that AAMI itself writes the standards. That's
like staff.
Exactly. Right. And that's not the case at all. We have balanced interest categories. So we have folks from industry, which are medical device manufacturers or testing laboratories. We have regulators such as the FDA and other government agencies that are involved. Certainly we have a lot of clinicians that are involved as well. Academics, general interest, and so forth. We really want to bring in all perspectives in the development of standards.
And it's a lot of hard work.
It
but
is.
has a big reward and a
Well,
big payoff in terms of how people use these documents.
Definitely,
So-
right. So it's, we often have competitor organizations in the same room, and that really goes out the window. You don't get a feel for that. Everybody is very focused on the mission, which is advancing patient safety.
It's about raising the bar.
Absolutely.
So all of this hard work gets done, a standard gets developed or advisory document, but let's stick with a standard for the moment. And then what? So sitting on the FDA side, this standard thing, and you guys are involved in that process though, right? You're heavily, you listed on one of your slides how many committees and other sort of, there was a great brag sheet there of how many different committees you guys are involved with on the FDA side.
Yeah, so we have a very robust standards program. Medical devices depend a lot on the use of standards and what is a medical device. And if you think about it, it's everything from a tongue depressor to an MRI machine, and there's a standard for each one of those. And they apply it. They're look at the the mosaic behind us here.
That's right.
Those are all standards. They're not. It's more than just letters and numbers. And we are a stakeholder in that process. To us, standards are an awesome communication tool, so we have a clear understanding on an approach a manufacturer or a testing organization is doing to communicate how they're fitting in that piece of the puzzle, which could be a standard, into what they're trying to do in describing their device's safe and effective use. We participate in all different levels. We have about 400 staff at CDRH engaged in standards, whether it's from an observational viewpoint of seeing how something is progressing along without active engagement.
So that would be sitting in on a working group or committee
maybe even
as an
just
observer?
observing it from afar, all the way
Okay.
up to sitting on the board of directors to organizations to help drive the policy and understanding what is needed to make standards regulatory ready or fit for purpose. You have a lot of different coined phrases, but our interest is to ensure that standards can be seen as a least burdensome tool to help drive communications and high levels of quality and competence that are built into that whole structure. And again, we're just one of the stakeholders at the table. We gain a lot of value by sitting with the industry partners and other regulators from around the world. We rely heavily on working with our SDOs and gaining the education and advancements, and we want to be an active participant in the process. Most people think because we have a recognition program that we too write the standard. And no, we don't write the standard. We participate with stakeholders in an open and transparent area to be able to do that. And I think that's one of the awesome powers of standards is there's really very few forums where you can sit down with your competitors or the other side of the fence and really work together collaboratively for a common goal. And that's really what a standard provides in that opportunity. And we get a lot more done in that process than just doing it in our own, behind the closed doors without other stakeholders present.
And I like to think sometimes about the absence. What would it look like without standards? It'd be very, very difficult for you all to manage the size portfolio that you do in terms of regulatory oversight, approval, post-market, all of those things. Standards really accelerate rather than slow down the process, right?
It does. And, years and years ago, back in 1990, we were asked by Congress to develop our own performance standards. And for about 7 or 8 years, we tried to do that. And we put together that many because it is a challenge to develop that by yourself without the expertise in the round areas that you get from a good balanced committee. In 1997, we had the Safe Medical Devices Act that permitted us, or actually mandated us, to recognize consensus standards, which opened up the recognition program and really brought out that construct on the importance of engaging with our stakeholders and looking at these as powerful tools. As that went through and was very successful, we realized how global our industry is. And AAMI is a global organization. All of our standards are global standards. When we had 21st Century Cures passed, it actually wrote in language to FDA to take into account manufacturers' reliance on standards as they use them around the world. And that's a big task to ask of an agency to figure out. But it also gave us the catalyst to start thinking, how can we work with our sister agencies and partners around the world? How can we start developing tools within organizations like the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, like the Global Harmonization Working Party, and also working with our international SDOs to start building that consortium of expertise and help drive this into making sure you can get a one-test worldwide approach in what standards are really designed to do, while giving us the confidence and the competence of how that testing is done.
Fantastic. So that all sounds pretty good. So from the industry perspective, how does an organization like yours approach this and take advantage, both participate in the process and then take advantage of the output, take advantage of those standards, and manage the standards portfolio that they use, that they leverage?
Well, first I'll touch on why they're important to us as well. And Scott certainly, hit on some of the key points. But the bottom line is, without standards, we wouldn't be able to produce, test, and sell our products, right? Anywhere in the world. It helps us facilitate with all of those things. But the ultimate goal, right, for all of us is to produce a safe and effective medical device, and standards allow us to do that. It's not just the regulatory part of it that allows us to do that, but having standards in place that set performance requirements, set test methods, set up the systems and processes that we use are just really critical to be able to produce products that are going to help patients. So that's why we use standards and why we participate, because we and the other medical device industry members really are looking to be able to participate in that process that sets those requirements for us, both so that they are reasonable, but also so that we can continually raise the bar, to use your phrase, to raise the bar to make sure that we're using the latest technology, the latest methods, the latest approaches, the latest software, the latest validation techniques, all of those types of things. Because we all want to make and produce good products. We all want to be able to achieve that goal to provide better patient care. So that's a really critical part of it. I'll also make a comment. One of the other reasons that we participate, not just to kind of set our own future, but we participate is that it's really unique, and I like to describe the standards environment almost like a mini marketplace. So as a publicly held company that 3M is, there's no place that I can attend a meeting or participate in a meeting that's like a standards arena, because we do sit at the table with the regulators, we sit at the table with our competitors, we sit at the table with the experts, other experts in the industry, and the users, right, the clinicians that actually use our products. So it gives us a really unique perspective, not only to contribute what ultimately will be in that standard, but to be able to get to know everybody and understand really what are those dynamics and what's important to everybody is really, really valuable.
And so your time is dedicated to this. There's a significant amount of time of other folks dedicated to this. So how is that organized? Is it usually a centralized function? And I'm sure it's different by company, company by company, but it's a significant resource investment, one that sounds like pays for itself pretty handily. But just say a little bit about that. I mean, there must be a lot of ways to tackle it, but what's the most common approach? Is it centralized? Is it distributed? Does it vary?
Yeah. It varies, right?
Okay.
And so we saw that at our pre-conference on Monday, because we had, in addition to myself, we had two other long-term, I'm going to say industry standards experts that presented what their companies did, and each of the three companies, managed the program a little bit differently. Some did have dedicated resources, not a huge number, but dedicated resources that was their full time. Some companies, not so much. My company, we really don't. But what we do is we leverage the subject matter experts that we have in the various functions to be able to participate and contribute comments and rationale into the documents themselves. But all three companies did have one commonality, and what they did is that they leveraged the other expertise, I'll say, within their companies to help contribute to the comments submitted by that particular company. Some are very formalized. One of the presenters actually had a pretty formal program, another kind of not quite so much. So it does vary, and it has to vary. It has to vary depending on what the organization is, the types of products or services that you produce and that you sell and support, and also the size of the organization. There's many factors that determine what your standard support program needs to look like inside of the company. And the thing that was really interesting about on Monday is that we shared that with a large group of people. Some of the questions that came from the audience were interesting and predictable, and some of them weren't. But the thing that I appreciated is that I learned some things. I think so often I think I know it all, but I don't know it all, and you never know it all. But there were some good tips coming from each of those different companies, even though we have differences, that then I'm going to take back into my internal standards management program and be able to raise it up a little bit as well.
I heard a similar comment from another large manufacturer that was reorganizing their center of excellence, around this. And it's someone that I would have thought, well, they have to have it figured out.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an organization that must have it nailed. But they shared that they came out of that session saying, we know some different ways to do things now. And I thought that was very, very interesting.
worthwhile.
So that's part of the benefit of being involved. So to segue then into sort of for folks that are watching this, that first step in getting involved. They don't have to figure it all out up front. You don't have to say, okay, I'm going to hire this full-time standards person or whatever it is. They might do that, they might not. But really, what's the entry point? How does a company that needs to be more engaged in this or wants to be more engaged with this, how do they start?
My view, number one, is become a member, right? Is join AAMI if you're not already a member. That's a really important piece of that. Now, I would guess that people watching this video are already members, but perhaps not participating in the standards program. There's a wealth of information on AAMI's website or any standards development organization that gives you the idea of how to get started. From an internal standpoint, maybe the question should really be is how do you get your organization to support, right, being involved with standards? And there's a variety of things that you can do. Number one, you have to have your leadership support. And it's all about educating them of really what is the importance of standards. And if you don't participate, what are the downsides or what are the risks if you don't participate? And we have lots of examples on both sides of that. But it starts there. The second piece is really to identify which of those standards are important to you as your company. And the majority of medical device companies know that. Maybe if you're a startup, maybe you don't know it all quite yet, but they know which ones are the important standards. They're the ones that we claim compliance to, that support our product claims, the ones that we use in our manufacturing or quality control testing, product development. So get the list of standards, and then you have to find the people within your organization. You won't look at any company and say, okay, unless they have dedicated staff, that, okay, here's a standards person, but you have to evaluate that person of how well they sort of understand what's happening in the market and within the company. You need to look at whether or not they can communicate. You know, some people that hardly ever talk in a meeting might not be the best person to participate in a standards
consensus-based
committee.
Is the key.
Yeah,
you have
where
to be
it's
part
all
of the
about
consensus.
It's all communication-based. So, you know, there's certain little tips for individuals. You can say, yeah, that might be a good standards person or might not, but they have to be a subject matter expert and have a desire to want to participate in this really unique environment. Very often, I just recommend go to a meeting. AAMI meetings are open public meetings. Anybody can attend, and now especially because we have a virtual option, you can sit at your desk or sit at home and attend those meetings and get a flavor for what that's like. And for some people, it's not their thing, not their cup of tea, but for a lot of other people, they're really energized by that environment. So there's some tips, you know, next year come to the pre-conference session. There's
you
another
go.
one.
And we're going to find some other venues for
it.
that as well,
Yeah,
so since the demand was so high. So from the regulator side, any tips for other folks? I mean, do most regulators in the world already get it? They're on board? Are we preaching to the choir in that part of the world, or are there things they could do better as well?
So regulators, we always have areas of improvement. You know, FDA, yes, we're highly involved in standards, and I think we have generally a pretty strong program, and we see the value and how it reduces burden and helps us communicate well with industry or industry communicating with us as well. By and large, we want to see regulators broadly engaging in standards at all levels in their organization, whether it's through their national body or national committee or at the international level, but also communicating with their other sister agencies around the world. AAMI provides great forums for us to be able to do that even at the AAMI level, as well as their involvement and leadership through the different tags that they manage or secretariat and committee management roles that they have. And that's a real important aspect, and it's not just to make sure as a regulatory body you know how to maximize or put standards to work and communicate it, but we also see it as adding value to our most important resource, which is the staff that you have. The ability to learn what industry is thinking about, the ability for you to share what regulators are thinking about in an open forum where you can develop those constructs and friendships of understanding of what you build is a real important part, and you can contribute in many meaningful ways at different levels and standards and that can bring great meaning. A lot of times standards don't have the true balance that really could maximize what a standard could do, and so that's why we are calling for experts. Small manufacturers are innovators. Typically, they have a different approach and can think of different areas. Some regulators are very strapped for resources and are highly dependent upon understanding how that conformity assessment process works, and certain standards that are overly complex don't make sense to them because it's just too wild to really figure out. And so we need to hear from that as well. And so part of our job is to try to encourage that, to work with the SDOs to try to figure out how we can branch that. And this is the environment you get. We have 3 different types of stakeholders just here at the table, and we all have that same goal. If you look back at what is the vision and mission of each one of our organizations, we all have a very central, similar public health, patient safety mission. And that's really what comes out at the table, is everyone's sharing the same desire to get the same high level of quality, first-in-the-world approach to protect patient safety, public health missions that are really key to this. And that's the beauty of the standards world and what we do in our industry. Whether you're a regulator or industry or academia or a patient advocate or clinician at the table, which we need all in almost every setting, you come out with something that becomes very powerful. And so your staff, going back to your most important resource, comes back to your organization with that greater appreciation, and that develops a stronger community of what you have in your own organization. And that's why we put so much value into that aspect. We could develop, instead of 1,400 recognized standards, 1,400 guidance documents, but the work that it takes to develop that is far greater than the commitment that it takes to work with all of our colleagues in a balanced setting, and we get a much stronger product in many cases that we can use to help do our regulatory mission.
Yeah, and you referenced other stakeholders that participate, so let me come back to you on that. Clinicians, we had Dr. Ehrenfeld from the AMA on earlier today, and they're actively, many physicians and clinicians involved in our committee. Say a little bit about that. Who are some of the folks that, other than industry regulators, that are involved in the process, and is their role similar? Is it different? Say a bit about that.
Oh, it's very similar. They're part of the consensus body, which means that they contribute to the perspective that's incorporated into any standard or technical document. We do have physicians. We had endoscopists who participated in ST91, the flexible endoscopes document. We have sterile processing professionals. We have health technology managers in healthcare, infection preventionists. Yeah,
nursing.
Exactly. Yeah. So it kind of runs the
And
gamut.
always looking for more.
Always. Yeah.
And the process is the same. Come to a meeting.
Very
They're
much
open,
so.
as you
See if
pointed
it's for
out.
you.
Right.
Try it out, become a member, and then you can become a contributor and a voting member of the committee, all those kinds of things. So,
Right.
so let's finish with what's next. And I'm going to throw out a discussion starter. If there's other directions you want to take it, go ahead. But I keep hearing about, and I may get the phrase wrong, regulatory ready standards.
Regulatory
Did I get that?
readiness.
Regulatory readiness. So what does that mean? Is that a big part of the next iterations of standards or the next generation of standards?
I think it's really trying to get that picture clear, a lot clearer than what it has been in the past. So what's regulatory ready standards? And I spoke a little bit about how certain regulators have different areas of struggle or understanding or even processes and how they utilize standards. So it's really trying to get that common area in agreement. A regulatory ready standard can't work just for FDA or just for Health Canada or MHRA. It needs to work for all of us at the same level, so that way they can test it one time and hopefully use that same test report worldwide and get the same level of confidence by each of the regulators on that. So there's a lot of aspects that we have worked on. We've written guidance on that from IMDRF on how to optimize standards for regulatory use, which also included increasing levels of participation, having balance in the committees that's identified so that way regulators that aren't present understand what went into the making of a standard. Did we have a clinician or a patient advocate involved in certain areas that really talk about patient safety goals? Those things are important when they can't be there, so they can help have more confidence that this is a standard that isn't an industry standard but a public health standard. And that's the important aspect. Many regulators do feel that standards are written by industry and only by industry, and not a lot of times realizing the balance that is not only typically there, but in many cases required, especially at the ANSI ANS process. That is one of the bears sometimes, is really demonstrating how this is a qualified, balanced committee that developed this standard. And that is there to bring confidence to all the different stakeholders engaged, whether it's a purchasing organization in healthcare or a regulator. Those all have meaning, and those have a real big role. So the regulatory ready standard is really what we're driving for. But the second stage of what we're really trying to get at, too, is measuring the impact of standards. And how does that help us feed into keeping up with where we're going and advancing health technologies and developing better streamlines in how we communicate? the tools that standards are into where they're going. And so how do we measure impact to standards isn't on how many standards we sell, but do we see a measurable impact on what their scope was towards, and can we somehow get that? And that requires us to use all stakeholders. That's an all-hands-on-deck approach. The regulators, the industry members, the conformity assessment bodies, the users of the devices, to really understand, from the development of the standard to its publication, did we achieve our goals and consensus? Did it get adopted the way it was included? And how are we seeing the tools, the products in the market actually perform that use those? Are we seeing an enhancement of what we're really driving to do here? And if the answer is yes, great. What can we do to improve that even more? If the answer is no, what did we get wrong? And can we try to fill that gap in and keep working that through? And that's a helpful tool that we rarely get in standards. It's usually just who around the table knows what, versus getting the whole community from even those outside of the standards engagement process to give us those real-world evidence nuggets of information that help drive where we can take it to that next edition.
Janet, anything to add to that, or thoughts about sort of the future of standards and what folks might be signing up for to help us accomplish in the next few years?
Yeah, over time, we've learned how to create better standards, and I think that process continues for what Scott touched on there, but also more engagement. For example, in some of our AAMI standards, we have international participants that sit on those committees as well. The involvement that we have at an international level, at an ISO or IEC level, that we then engage and have better understanding of what are the requirements in the other parts of the world, so we're not creating standards as much that are just for one region or just for one individual country. So the kind of globalization of it is continuing to increase. That's only better for companies, whether you're big or small, right? Because that allows you, again, the phrase, right, is one test, one product, across the world, right? We don't have to do different things that then localize different products. So it's going to continue. There's no question about that. I think our processes are getting better. Certainly, COVID had a big impact on that. There used to be a belief that all standards work had to be done live in person, and now we have a big virtual component for AAMI standards. And what the result of that has been is so many more clinicians can be involved, because they may not be able to travel to a meeting and spend a few days, but they certainly can get on a Teams call, right, and participate in standards. So there are things that are continuing to change. I believe it's all for the better, and this isn't the end. I think there's much more that will happen.
And we can develop standards faster today than we could
exactly.
5, 10 years ago as well.
Right.
And that was always the, you're going to develop a standard. Oh, well, let me know when you're retired. We have many tools. AAMI has restructured a lot of ways that they can develop standards, and other SDOs, including ISO and IEC22, have created different pathways, and you can get standards done, meaningful standards, that are very robust in a much shorter time than what it was traditionally done. It really goes into the activity, though, as well, and how much thought goes into those initial constructs of what's coming in as a draft. But yeah, we can do it much faster, and they're of higher quality documents still. It's not, you're not losing quality based upon the speed. And I think the virtual environment did help lend itself to that as well. I'm seeing as much work done in a 3-day, 3-hour per day meeting than we used to sometimes get from a 5-day, 9-hour per day meeting. And it's because we're very, it's very directed what you're trying to get done, and, people's time is important. But, it doesn't take away the value of an in-person meeting by any means. There's other things you can't get done in a virtual setting that you can. But I think it allows us to balance out what's the right approach. How can we maximize participation? What can we do in each of these settings to get the best possible product?
I think there's another aspect, too, that's really important. In my time in standards development, is we're much more focused now on having it evidence-based and data-driven, not only the expert opinion around the table. We revert to that if there isn't data and there isn't evidence, but we heavily rely on that and seek that out in a more aggressive way than what we had done in the past. And if that data doesn't exist, there'll be round-robin testings, there'll be certain things to be able to develop methods and protocols. And so that's another really important change that I've seen in the last probably decade or so, different than prior to that. So, and that's important.
We talked a little bit about that earlier with AI and some of the coming technologies, and how the nature of those devices will require more real-world evidence to validate the outputs, and in closer to real time. Because in some ways we have no other way to prove out the efficacy of an algorithm, for instance. the proof is in the pudding, I guess. So, Amanda, any last words other than join AAMI, get involved, help us develop these standards? What do you
Definitely
think?
that. A couple things I wanted to piggyback on. Obviously, speed of standards development is something we've been trying to get our heads around for a while. The other thing I would add on to that is innovative standards development approaches, so different ways that we can develop standards. We touched on, we went from the model of everything was in person. You had to come together in person to work on a standard, and now we've moved to a hybrid approach or sometimes fully virtual. But I think there's other ways that we can develop standards that will help speed them along. Whether it's a different way of coming together or perhaps starting with a different type of document or elevating certain documents quickly along certain pathways to get them approved as standards. The other thing I would add is increasing the pipeline of AAMI standards to the international sphere. So we can often develop things much faster here at AAMI and then serve them up, and it's a ready-made document. It's a good foundation for international work.
As opposed to doing the initial work
Starting
at that
whole
level.
cloth, you have a blank piece of paper.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Well, listen, thanks to all three of you, not only for sitting down for a few minutes for everything you do. It's definitely moving the needle on patient safety. So as a patient, like we all are, deeply appreciative. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say there's a lot of AAMI training available on this as well. So hopefully folks will come to the website, look into our AAMI training, and find that as an entry point to all of this as well. So
Absolutely.
thank you all,
Yeah.
and we'll talk
Thank
again
you.
soon, I'm
Thanks,
sure.
Robert.
Thanks.